Oké, beste mensen. Het is 1 uur geweest en we zijn inmiddels de 50 deelnemers gepasseerd. Van harte welkom bij deze speciale webinar over IoT, Internet of Things. Het is een Engelstalige webinar, Engels gesproken. En dat heeft alles te maken met onze belangrijkste gast vandaag, Phil Zimmermann. En ook Ben van Lier haakt aan, maar vanwege het feit dat Phil als Amerikaan liever Engels spreekt dan Nederlands, doen we dit allemaal in het Engels vandaag. A very warm welcome, Phil Zimmermann, and also Ben van Lier. We've passed the 69 participants at this moment. I just ended my commercial break for all the next CIP activities in the remainder of December. But this will be a special IoT session with a man as our main guest, Phil Zimmermann. You are pretty well known. You are the founder, the inventor of the PGP protocol. And first I thought, I'm not a cryptographer myself, but I thought PGP, that must be something very technical, an abbreviation of some kind. And then I found out that PGP stands for pretty good privacy. That makes you someone who has been at the root of encryption and cryptography and started with that many years ago. But this is not a webinar about cryptography. This is a webinar about IoT. So Phil, in your view, how would you describe IoT and how does cryptography enter the picture?
Well, IoT introduces a number of vulnerabilities that can be attacked by sophisticated attackers. And some of those attacks involve them reading the traffic between the IoT device and the server. And to hide that traffic, one must use cryptography. One must also use cryptography when updating the firmware in the IoT device, because you have to make a digital signature to convince the IoT device that the downloaded update is legitimate. So you could say that in those two cases, that cryptography plays a role. But the vulnerabilities of IoT devices goes beyond that. We are deploying devices in our environment that provide opportunities for surveillance, either from the vendor that made the IoT device or from third parties who find a way to break in and to access the telemetry sent by the IoT device back to the mothership, the servers. Or maybe they can take over control of the IoT device. In other words, someone other than the vendor could take control of the IoT device. This has been done by intel agencies to gain access to a local area network that has a laptop computer that they want to attack. But they might come into the home through a child's toy. Children's toys sometimes are IoT devices.
So cryptography is very much at the heart of IoT functioning, IoT management, and also IoT security.
Yes, cryptography even protects things where it's not just cryptographic functions that cryptography helps protect. It also provides access control and and trying to protect IoT devices from being commandeered by third parties.
Okay. I realize I've been a very poor host while starting off this webinar. Of course, I've introduced Phil Zimmermann. Ben van Lier, you may also know, he is as our co-host. He's a professor at the Berlin University, also teaches at the Erasmus Hogeschool and is director of strategy at Centric. And also chairman of our IoT special interest group. And we'll be holding this webinar as a sort of a roundtable conversation without one presenter after another and then going into Q&A. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A of this Zoom session. And I'll share the questions with Phil and or Ben. Ben can also have questions by himself for Phil, because he's our main star for this webinar show. Phil, is there anything you would like to explain a little more about your own background and your involvement with IoT?
Well, I've spent my whole career working or a good part of my career working in cryptography. 30 years ago, I developed an email encryption software called PGP, which you mentioned earlier. And in the 30 years since then, I've also spent a lot of my time on secure telephony, secure messaging, and miscellaneous cryptography related projects. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about is pervasive surveillance. We find ourselves in a world now with just a rising tide of surveillance. And some of that is, deliberate surveillance by, deploying cameras, ubiquitous cameras like in China or Britain, but it's also coming in other countries. But part of it also is the voluntary surveillance that we submit to when we purchase IoT products and deploy them in our homes. If you have an Amazon Echo or a Google equivalent product that you talk to and get responses from, it's possible for those products to listen to your conversations without necessarily being triggered by the keywords that are supposed to activate it. I was visiting my daughter a couple years ago in the US, and we were sitting at the breakfast table just talking about miscellaneous breakfast table things. And the Google product reacted spontaneously as if we had summoned it. And that made me worry about the possibility that it was listening to things without being asked to. And so
you were talking to your daughter, and at the same time, the Google machine interfered in your conversation and started mingling in by itself.
Yeah, it acted as if we had summoned it, but with the keywords. So that's kind of disturbing because, maybe it's listening at other times as well. We find ourselves surrounded by IoT devices that we actually pay money for, that through varying degrees, just in the normal course of the functionality of the products, are providing surveillance information. There's been so much written about the cybersecurity vulnerabilities of IoT devices. Many of those conversations are about trying to protect the telemetry, the link between the IoT device and the servers from the company that made it. Having an encrypted link, maybe through a TLS tunnel, for example. Or people worry about someone breaking in and taking control of the device, hacking in and getting kernel privileges and, installing malware on it. But there's other vulnerabilities that are intrinsic to the nature of the device. The fact that the device does not represent the interest of the consumer who purchased it has to be taken into consideration as a cybersecurity threat. The device is representing the interest of the vendor that manufactured it. And so when you install a device like that in your home, it's going to behave according to the business model of the vendor. I have a flat screen TV that I bought many years ago, and I bought the very last one that they had in the shop that was the display model because it didn't have any cameras on it or microphones. And the new models from, the ones that were on sale, that I could have bought, had a webcam and a microphone. I didn't want to buy something like that. I wanted a normal TV. So I have, maybe I'm a Luddite, but the idea of a TV that's watching me while I'm watching the TV is kind of creepy. And it's representing the interest of the vendor. And so they explain it by saying that it does facial recognition to identify who's watching so that they can personalize the viewing experience and present your preferences, what kinds of things you like to watch. Or the microphone is justified by saying it can respond to voice commands. But it also turns your living room into North Korea. And so I think I think we're crazy to do that to ourselves. It's a self-inflicted surveillance.
That's a statement.
If I had a
Sounds
TV
like an embassy.
that had software that represented my interest, I would feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd still have to worry about an attack that would try to get control of the TV, but that's a separate problem. And for expensive products like TVs, maybe you can put in countermeasures to try to protect it from outside attacks. But there's lots of IoT devices that are very low cost, and they don't have the money to put in the countermeasures.
No. And it really cuts it short if you talk about a television that's intelligent, making your living room a part of North Korea. It's almost like an embassy with local territory within the walls. But we all know, or could know, that part of the software that Samsung develops is being developed in North Korea even. So that makes it for them closer to home. How concerning is that?
Well, I wasn't really calling out North Korea in particular. I mean, and I think what you're referring to is, what if North Korea attacks the device and takes control of it? I was speaking metaphorically, that in the normal operation of the device, in the absence of any attacks, just how the device normally works day to day, as intended, as designed, that it's putting you under surveillance. It's taking the camera feed and the microphone feed and sending it back to a server. The server can do, language processing, and the facial recognition features can be done on the server. And so, metaphorically, it's turning your living room into North Korea. But you raise another point, which is, well, what if it really is North Korea because they attacked your TV? Maybe the TV is made by a well-intentioned vendor. Maybe it's just trying to do its job, but North Korea finds a way to attack it and insert malware into the TV. And then, then your living room is definitely closer to North Korea in that case. So imagine you watching movies with your girlfriend or wife, and maybe these are naughty films that you're watching, and maybe you and your wife are, not exactly dressed for the office. Then the TV could be, getting things that could be used as compromat. What if it's the Russian GRU that has attacked your TV? There's so many devices that can be hijacked by people that don't wish you well. It might be the vendor, but it might also be a third party attacking it. One of the problems that we have right now is that because China manufactures so many consumer electronic products, they're manufacturing products that are IoT devices. And the other side of an IoT device is the server. And so what if those servers are in China? There is a company called Tuya that makes IoT products that are connected to servers in China under the control of Chinese companies in China. And those products are collecting telemetry. They're sensing the environment. They might be tracking your movements in the house. Perhaps they turn the lights on when you enter a room to save energy. So they're monitoring the environment and sending telemetry back to China that says which room you're in. But, maybe that's not a serious threat, but when you have your house full of consumer electronic products that are made in China, it presents intelligence opportunities. What if you're the employee of a government agency? What if you're an employee of the foreign ministry of your country? What if you're an employee of the intelligence agencies of your own country or the military? And maybe China takes an interest in some things about you that they would like to, maybe they want to attack your laptop computer. And if they can come in through an IoT device, now they're on your local area network at home. It might be easier to attack your laptop computer from within your local network, because maybe your laptop computer has stronger defenses against attacks from outside, but weaker defenses against attacks from inside your house. And this has been done by Western intel agencies against foreign targets. And so probably, it's being done by foreign intelligence agencies.
It's not that it can happen, it has already been done numerous times.
It has been done, yes. And as we increasingly depend on products made by the world's largest manufacturer of consumer electronics, China, more and more of those products are under the control of China. And this, I think, presents intelligence gathering opportunities for the Chinese government. I mean, we already see examples in a related area, not IoT, but many of the European telcos are deploying 5G equipment that they could have bought 5G equipment from European vendors, but they didn't buy them from European vendors because the Chinese vendors, Huawei notably, makes superior products at lower cost. And so they're more attractive to telcos. Instead of buying it, from a European vendor, they buy it from Huawei. And Huawei is a company founded by the Chinese military. And so this presents signals intelligence opportunities for China, a potential adversary. I don't want to make too much out of China right now, but I'm trying to say that IoT devices, I'll let go of the 5G discussion right now, but there's an analogy between the 5G discussion and which vendor. Do you use a European vendor or a Chinese vendor? I would argue that it would be better if European telcos buy this equipment from European vendors. And for the same reason, we should try to find ways to not buy IoT devices that send telemetry back to China. Some of those devices have microphones for responding to voice commands. So, then we have microphones in our homes that are sending a telemetry stream back to Chinese servers, and that clearly would present intelligence opportunities. So this is not even looking at the malfunctioning of the devices. This is just looking at, well, where do you buy them and who made them and whose interest are they serving? I don't want to sound too paranoid, but even if you bought them from European vendors, the fact is that IoT devices are driven by price pressures, to make them as cheaply as possible, and that reduces your ability as a manufacturer to put in strong defenses against external attacks. And, can you always do software updates properly with digitally signed updates? Because maybe there's a vulnerability that's found and it requires a patch to fix it. Does the product have a mechanism for that? If it's a very low cost product, then maybe it doesn't. In which case, what if it's a light bulb? You think light bulbs are relatively harmless, but what if the light bulb, for the life of me, I can't imagine why anybody needs to buy a light bulb that is accessible from the internet. But that's my Luddite tendencies. But, the light bulb or the child's toy in the earlier example can be attacked remotely. And then if it's controlled by the attacker, maybe it can't really achieve very much within that device, but what it can do is operate as an attack point within the local area network of the home to attack something more important like a laptop and exfiltrate the files. So this, in the case of using a child's toy as the attack vector, that's been done in the real world. So I think IoT opens a Pandora's box of attack opportunities from, criminal organizations or foreign intelligence agencies, or maybe the vendor themselves.
Okay, we have been getting some questions through the Q&A, but I also saw Ben's hand. Ben, do you want to comment or put in a question?
Yes. Yes. Thanks for your ideas about this Internet of Things development. And I was very touched by your example of your daughter and the Echo, because I have the same discussions with my son, who, for instance, also has a Ring doorbell. But what I'm questioning myself and also questioning my students is: are we into a generation difference or even a generation conflict, in which for the younger ones this kind of development of connected devices in the network is more a functionality, something to use, something they like, all that kind of things, and that we, coming from an older age, older generation, are not so acquainted with this kind of problems, this kind of possibilities, that we can't adapt to this new kind of devices. That's my first question.
You mean that we're not used to this, and so we're
Yes.
walking into a trap that we don't see, because it
we
goes
as
against our...
elderly, we see the trap, but the younger ones are using it because it is handy, easy, all that kinds of arguments.
Yeah. Well, I think that's happening. I mean, when I try to talk to my daughter about this, well, her husband doesn't really see the problem. She sees it because, well, her dad is Phil Zimmermann, and you know. But her husband thinks that I'm making too much out of it. We are already surrendering our privacy to social networks, for example, and it's destroying Western civilization. And so but it isn't just social networks, it's IoT devices. I mean, the erosion of our privacy operates differently in these different environments. And social networks, it's driven by algorithms that are super destructive to the fabric of society. In the case of IoT devices, you don't see the destruction of the fabric of society, but what you do see is intelligence gathering opportunities. And so, you know, I mean, something that I'm kind of concerned about, we're all under pressure to reduce carbon emissions, and electric vehicles are an important part of that. We really, really need to migrate to electric vehicles. Now, some of those electric vehicles are going to be sold, especially in Europe, made in China. And they're going to be sending telemetry back to the servers in China, just the way Tesla vehicles send telemetry back to servers in the US.
For Europe, there's a how do you call it, dual problem, because the Tesla takes the data to the United States and the Polestar takes the data to China. And we don't have any governance about this kind of data traffic.
Well, but I think there's some hope that we could try to exercise some control. The Chinese government prohibits Chinese government employees from purchasing Tesla vehicles unless Tesla moves their servers into China. Well, they don't have to move the American servers into China. They have to set up servers in China for handling the telemetry from cars sold in China to Chinese people. And until those servers are working, which I think they are now working, but certainly this put a lot of pressure on Tesla to set them up, China was not going to allow Chinese customers that work for the Chinese government to purchase these cars.
But does that mean that we in Europe do have make the same
I think we
legal...
should put the same pressures on. You know, I know that, I mean, China's in a stronger position. They have a lot more control over what happens in China. And I think that European governments maybe need to be more assertive about this.
We can also make legal obligations that they have to put their servers also in Europe. But what you are getting then is that we are getting 3 different kinds of internet and data sovereignty, and that will give new opportunities, but also new problems. But what you are seeing is that this kind of discussions are actually also in Europe going on. But is that the way that we have to go to get more sovereignty on our data from the devices?
I think that we should not be sending telemetry to China. I don't, you know,
but then
I
also
don't
not to
really
the
care
United
so
States.
much about sending it to Tesla servers in the US. I mean, of course, I'm an American, so you might think that I'm biased like that. But I don't think that I am biased just because I'm an American. I'm looking at it from the point of view that these are not morally equivalent. A democracy, a liberal democracy, is a better place to send the data than an autocracy. And especially an autocracy that can emerge as a potential adversary in a future conflict. You know, these cars have sensors in the car. They have cameras to see if you're paying attention to your driving, because autonomous vehicles, sometimes, at least at this stage in the evolution of autonomous vehicles, they're trying to see if you're paying attention to the driving. Are your eyes on the road? They might also have a microphone in the car.
Sure.
And maybe the microphone is there for some legitimate reason having to do with how the car works.
Yep.
But how many important confidential conversations have you had in your car? Quite a few, probably.
Yes.
People tend to, when they're in their car, they tend to feel like they're in a safe place to have a conversation. You're in an enclosed space. The windows are rolled up. There's a kind of feeling of quiet and intimacy and opportunity for confidential conversations. So people may open up and say things in a car that they might not say in some other environment. And so if there's a microphone in that car and it's sending a stream back to China, well, what if the people in the car are employees of the foreign ministry or the intel agency or the Ministry
Correct.
of Defense?
But in this development, you could see and also make analysis that we as humans, we want to have comfort, we want to have ease, and we want to have functionality, and we are buying with our intentions this kind of new devices. Is there from which we could know that they are insecure by its design? They are cheap, they're easy. So is there also something to say about ourselves, that we are not paying attention to this kind of development?
I refuse to buy things that listen to me in my
But
home.
you are a small percentage of consumers.
Yeah, I'm strangely eccentric that way, and the young people probably think that I'm just old-fashioned. But yeah, I think it's scary to have someone having control of a microphone in my home. There's just too many intelligence gathering opportunities. And cameras, my goodness, cameras in my home under someone else's control. Why would I pay for that? I mean, what I actually have to pay for my own surveillance kind of reminds me of in Soviet times, and I don't know, it may still be true today in Russia, but in Soviet times, if the state, executes you for treason or something like that, they send a bill for the bullet to the family of the person that they shot. They have to pay for the bullet that killed their family member. Okay, maybe that's an overdramatic, overheated analogy, but I'm trying to say that if you have to pay for your own oppression, then that adds insult to injury. If somebody's going to put a microphone and a camera in my home, well, I would rather have a say in that. like I don't want to buy it and install it myself.
But in the Netherlands, when you are getting older and you need some care, there is a possibility that they will put a camera in your home so that they can deliver better care, because there are not enough people to come at your home. Then we are slowly but surely going into this kind of developments in which all this kind of devices are used.
I think that I would imagine that there's enough people in the Netherlands that would object to the Dutch government doing that they would say, this is too dangerous. Here's the problem.
I can assure you that there are more elderly people on this moment by themselves who let this kind of cameras installed by their children.
Well, then, okay, I think that
because they are weird.
maybe it's possible to find an engineering solution where things could be a bit more voluntary. You know, like
So
maybe you could wear something around your neck, a little pendant with a button on it. If you
So
push
the
that
solution
button,
will be in the
then it turns
technology.
the cameras on, and the cameras could then see that you're having difficulty. That would not be so bad. But I think that just having, you know, pervasive surveillance, it's, you know, you have mission creep. One thing that you have to consider is that even if you have a comfortable relationship with your government, where people trust the government, you have to consider that democracies everywhere are collapsing into autocracies as we speak. Notably, the United States. The United States is on a knife's edge of collapsing into an autocracy. But we've seen it in Brazil, we've seen it in Hungary, in Poland. It's in various stages of happening in a number of European countries. I think even in Italy, there's a little bit of that that's happened. It's not super bad yet, but it is something they've been struggling with. And even our own country, you know, we're only one election cycle away from something changing. And if that ever happens, if we've got cameras deployed everywhere for the benefit of healthcare, then whoever comes to power suddenly finds themselves with opportunities to surveil everyone.
So from your view, do we have to pay more attention to the technical possibilities to make these insecure devices be more secured by governance, rules, technological possibilities, and that kind of things? Because we can't stop the development of the devices itself.
Yeah, I know, we can't stop it. I know that's where where my sensibilities and my advice, I recognize in advance, no one's going to listen to me. My advice is, you know, don't put yourself in that kind of environment. But I know you're right, nobody's going to listen to that. So we have to live with the fact that IoT is a force of nature in the market. So we need to try to do some regulatory pressure to toughen them up, to make it so that they're required to withstand attacks. I'm not sure exactly how that would be turned into regulations, but we have to try. We have to do something.
But then we are talking about the easy part, about the consumer goods. But the same development is going on in industry, energy, all those kinds of economical sectors. So the problem is growing every day.
In the industrial setting, the stakes are higher.
Yeah.
Because the chances of them being attacked by a foreign intelligence agency is much higher. It could be used, you know, to destroy things, to cause massive flooding, for example. That's something that the Netherlands would certainly have to worry about. You know, look what we did with Stuxnet on the uranium hexafluoride gas centrifuges in Iran. Industrial controls can be attacked. And if those controls are for large scale, you know, heavy things like floodgates and water management, or, you know,
factories.
Yeah.
First to Walter.
Thank you. We have many remarks in the Q&A about how much involvement should a government have on data anyway, and how about the NSA's integrity. And we have in Europe different ethical ideas about privacy than people have adopted in the United States. So ethically, it's not a homogeneous playing field. There's a particular question that you would like to respond to, Phil. Not everyone is technically very savvy, so not every person is comfortable dealing with encryption tools and cryptography. So we have seen many external companies, third parties, managing and distributing encryption keys. Is that an added risk to all this that we're talking about?
You mean to have keys that are under the control of someone else who tells you to install these keys?
How vulnerable are they?
I prefer to produce products that generate keys on the device and then release their public key. But sometimes for low-cost devices, it makes more sense to install them at the factory. But if it was something that was protecting important things, I would insist that the devices generate key pairs on the device. It's the only thing. It's the only way to be sure. And then even then, you're not sure, of course, because then there's still opportunities to attack the devices by buffer overflow attacks or something that would get, inject malware into the device.
Okay, and another part of the discussion, and maybe it's time to move into that because we've passed halfway of this webinar. We've been talking about the risk, about the enormity of it, about the actuality of it, and the home environment due to Corona measurements has become more a liability than ever before because many more people and also civil servants work from home. So this is really a truly increased risk.
They're doing it a lot more now during the pandemic.
Exactly. But how about the prevention side? How about the possibilities for raising your defense, for becoming more available to resist attacks or becoming less vulnerable? Can you tell anything about that? And what would you advise governments?
Well, I think that one could imagine building IoT devices that meet certain standards against attack. But let's just imagine that, let's fast forward to a future where we now have imposed standards. So the devices have to meet those standards to show resistance to attack. That isn't quite enough to solve the problem because of some things I brought up earlier. Who's manufacturing these devices? It isn't always third-party attacks. It might be the vendor themselves. The vendor is receiving telemetry from the device in the normal operation of the device, not because of an attack, but because that's how the device is supposed to work. And if they're in possession of that telemetry stream, they can, they can do things to their advantage at a geopolitical level. Lately, I've been talking about IoT devices for years as being having large attack surfaces in general. But in the past year, I've thought more about it in geopolitical terms. And also, you mentioned NSA. I've spent my whole career warning people about NSA, but I have to say that there's a couple of things I'm concerned about right now. When we're thinking about IoT devices, I worry more if they're made in a country like China. To me, there's a difference between a NATO ally that is a liberal democracy and an autocracy that is a potential adversary. I don't see these things as equivalent. However, so maybe I can say that NSA is not as bad as the Chinese military. But having said that, what about the NSA in the next presidential administration? Who might that be? Who might be directing the NSA, and who might be firing lots and lots of key people at NSA and replacing them with loyal puppets? So NSA could become more like the intel agencies of adversaries. Maybe it won't be a NATO ally next time around. Maybe NSA will be part of a country that is no longer a NATO ally.
No.
And so that makes me worry more about the NSA, not from what they'll do now, but what they might do. I mean, I've always worried about what they'll do now because they have very powerful signals intelligence capabilities. But when I think about Russia and China, I worry about them more because, I mean, Russia attacked our elections and are attacking Europe with disinformation about COVID vaccines and turning people against each other. And China, of course, is it's a higher inertia thing that is more worrisome as time goes by.
Yeah.
But I think NSA could become more worrisome if it falls under the control of a hostile administration that turns the U.S. into a rogue state.
Beyond that development, which might be a possibility, how about more local things? There are a few remarks in the Q&A about drones. Do you consider drones to be a higher level of risk than other IoT devices because they're mostly fitted with cameras, or is it just an IoT device?
When you say drones, are you talking about consumer products?
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are other drones
Yeah.
that can fire.
Yeah. I would hope that the expensive drones that carry weapons have better protections.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all IoT devices can be commandeered by people that they're not designed to be commandeered by. Maybe, I don't know, maybe consumer drones. I haven't heard of any incidents of somebody seizing control of consumer drones.
Okay. Let's leave it at that. Can we make it very practical? I myself, I live in an organization. Sorry?
Can I look into some other questions that are asked?
Oh, yeah.
Because there are some questions about can we do something about it, or are there legal things in progress about the devices? And what we can mention is that there is now a development in the European Union about legal possibilities to protect data, for instance. There is now working on with the European Commission on the Data Governance Act, in which also the natural and the non-natural data will be in scope. And also there will be discussions about the fact, what can we do with the data that is coming out of this kind of devices? And there is now a legal act by the European Commission that they want to have a law in 2024 about the security of the Internet of Things elements. And the discussions about that will start this month, I think. And every member state of the European Union have to put in some information about the fact that how the law has to work for this kind of consumer and non-consumer products which are connected to the internet. So there are some steps being made by the European Commission together with the member states. And there was also a remark by Tim about it is not interesting to do something about the data because when you use Amazon or RBS, then it will go to the United States. Also on that part, the European Commission is now making progress. There is, since last year, policy rules about the European strategy for data. And the European Commission has made it a strategic point that they want to go into a discussion how they could have the data stored and used only within Europe. That are very difficult policy elements, but there is a notion that they have to do something about it, and they want to have the data within the European
I'd like
continent.
to speak to that point. The idea of data sovereignty, I think, is important for certain kinds of data. Certainly anything having to do with national security or medical records, for example. Medical records should stay in the country of the population that owns that medical record. But I caution against expanding that out to be all data, because if you have to make products, consumer electronic products that are specific to each country, then that opens the door for dictators can say, well, if you want to sell iPhones in Russia, you're going to have to make them cater to Russian national security interests. You have to put backdoors in them for the Russian intel agencies to spy on the Russian people. And then Apple would have to make a special SKU for products sold in Russia or products sold in any other country. Imagine if it balkanizes the smartphones.
No, but we are here talking about European rules. So rules for all the 27 member states and the 520 million consumers in it. So it could be interesting also for Chinese producers to agree with the laws in the European Union because they otherwise can't sell their product. And yes, this is a next step into compartmentalizing the world into several compartments as China, Europe, and the United States. But I think there is no other solution on that.
Well, just a few minutes ago, I was advocating that we try to control the data that IoT devices produce and not send it to China. And so here I am a few minutes later saying, well, be careful, because if you balkanize the behavior of these devices, then it also makes it easier for autocratic states to control the behavior of devices sold within that country to adhere to the convenience of the needs of the autocratic state. And so to some extent, there is a benefit to having a worldwide set of behaviors for consumer electronic products. I mean, Apple FaceTime uses encryption. It's not as good as some of the products I've made, but it is end-to-end encryption. And so it's nice that that's sold all over the world. I mean, Australia passed some laws against end-to-end encryption. And that would mean if those laws were enforced, that Apple would have to make a special version of the iPhone that couldn't do FaceTime, or maybe had to run FaceTime in some other way that didn't have end-to-end encryption. And so if Australia could command Apple to do that, and if Apple, it caved into that, then we could have the balkanization of all
that's already
governments all over the place.
Because Apple is making a special phone for China. So then maybe I think also there's also a question about awareness. Maybe this kind of things are becoming part of a new era in which we are going, in which technology is a essential part of our living and working and being in the society, but we have no clue what that means and what we have to arrange to be in a more secure position on that part. And there was a question of Tim on the end about this kind of awareness. Are we aware enough to be a responsible human being in a digital era?
Well, the average person on the street doesn't really think deeply about these things. So, it's hard for the average person to make good, sophisticated analysis of the issues. But I think that people that are technically savvy, that are in a position to give good policy advice on technology, should try to give the best advice, the most well-informed advice. I think that Europe has an opportunity to do things in policy space that would be hard to do in the US. You've got the GDPR, and that's something that does not exist in the US. And I can see that, we can all see that it is affecting US technology companies that normally just grab all the data they can, and they're held back by the GDPR when they're talking to the 450 million people in Europe. And so that's good. I mean, the fact that we can do that means that maybe we can do some other things relating to everything we've just been talking about, that would be impossible in the US. Europe has for decades had the tools for, having policy pressure to preserve privacy. You've had for decades, you've had privacy commissions. We don't have a privacy commission in the US. Canada does, oddly enough, but the US doesn't. And so regulatory opportunities to protect privacy are stronger in Europe. And we should keep developing things in the direction of protecting privacy in policy space. Meanwhile, technologists could try to provide a little bit of protection in the product space or technology space. I mean, that's what encryption products are supposed to do. But they can't solve the whole problem alone. We can't encrypt your face, for example. So we need policy initiatives to make it, that put pressure on to not let governments put pervasive facial recognition on hundreds of millions of cameras.
In the final part of this webinar, I'd like to get back to some things said in the Q&A and ask you one final question, Phil. One person states, and I'm just quoting what he states, just a comment, and this is directed to you. I don't think you are too old-fashioned. I was 2 years old when we moved from Poland in 1985. The government knew everything of my father. We have been lucky. Can't imagine how it would have been now in this digital world. He is aware, he, she, that's for sure. And you're not old-fashioned, that's good. But just, I wanted to make this quote resound in this webinar because it's really important to hear it as well. Another one says, I'm really curious how we're going to end this thing happily and positively. That's a challenge. But let's make this very practical. I myself work for a government organization who is responsible for paying the unemployment benefits. Billions of euros paid out every year. Many people, most people live in offices, work in offices, sorry, and they also work mainly now from home, but also in the future, this is expected to continue to a large extent. Where would you advise the people responsible for information security, including IoT, I hope, to focus their attention to raise their resilience? Would you ask them or advise them to focus on the home environment? Would you advise them to focus on the office buildings where they have potentially internet connected coffee machines, electrical loading things for cars, building systems that has to be managed? Where would you advise them to focus on to stop the biggest leak possibilities?
Well, I think that products that exist in your home are, with cameras and microphones especially, there should be subject to more regulation. Another thing is that, look, I'm not suggesting that we stop trading with China. I think that, China has a lot of attractive things. They have lower labor costs. They have huge manufacturing capabilities. I mean, we should be trading with them. But, and also we're going to need their electric vehicles. We need to get as many people as possible migrating to get rid of carbon emissions as much as we can. So China is going to play an important role of that. But I think that we need to apply regulatory pressure the same way the Chinese have on Tesla. And there should also be pressure on IoT devices. I think that IoT devices should send their telemetry to servers in Europe, not China. Maybe with warning labels. I mean, if the products don't comply with that, maybe there could be package warnings saying, I'm not sure exactly what the warnings would say, but Europeans are kind of lacking in their innovative capabilities, the way, like, not as good as Silicon Valley. The venture capital apparatus in Europe is terrible. We can't really do what they do in Silicon Valley, but what we can do is we can apply regulatory pressures in ways that the U.S. Legal system is unlikely to legislate. So we need to push back against surveillance and against against the dangers of IoT devices that either are deliberately designed to provide surveillance opportunities or can be attacked by third parties and turned into surveillance devices from the attack.
So that having been said and all being true, what would you advise a local governmental chief information security officer or CIO to do, or to look for, to be aware of?
Well, I would discourage, if I'm working in the classified world, I would discourage my employees from installing IoT devices in the home that might have sensors on them, like microphones and cameras, at the very least. But I think that that's a local decision that could be made by local managers.
Mm-hmm.
But you should also have, at a national level and also at an EU level, there should be recognition of this problem, and there should be policy initiatives at the EU level. And some of them can be quite ambitious. I mean, look, the GDPR is an extremely ambitious package of regulations that, you know, I mean, really incredibly ambitious. So there could be regulatory things that we can do at the EU level and also at the national levels to provide the market incentives to, you know, to have the manufacturers change the way they do IoT.
But are you saying there is no local fix, no local way to raise your defense? It has to be done nationally?
Well, I do it locally myself. In my home, I don't allow that kind of stuff. That's very local.
Yeah, true. Okay, we're almost closing. Ben, is there anything you would like to say in closing this webinar to Phil or ask him as a final question?
Yes, my final question would be, we have started with cryptography for email. Cryptography for IoT devices would be difficult because of the several connections, the ways that they are functioning. Do you think that cryptography for IoT devices will be the solution, or do we have to think on other solutions?
Well, I would encrypt the telemetry link back to the server, because if you don't do that, then somebody could just packet sniff, you know, run WireGuard, for example. I'm sorry, not WireGuard, Wireshark, you know, and just intercept the packets and observe what they're sending. And that's just a little too easy. That telemetry should be encrypted, but that's not the whole point. I mean, yes, you can insert cryptography. You could require digital signatures for updates. You can have link encryption for the telemetry, but there's still the behavior of the device as it was designed that, you know, represents the interest of the vendor. And that, you know, I think that introduces surveillance opportunities that are not in our interest.
So we have to think and rethink the technology that we are using.
Yeah, and also even leaving a surveillance out of it and just talking about buying products that we'd like, that maybe we like them, they're nice products and we buy them and we pay for them. But we also have to consider that IoT devices also will stop working eventually. Why? Because the company that built them, at some point they're going to stop supporting them. And when they stop supporting them, I mean, I have a stereo system that's decades old. And if they stop supporting it, I don't care. It still works. But what if I buy a stereo system today and it's tied to servers at the manufacturer's, you know, facility? If they stop supporting it, it just stops working.
Yes.
I have a similar
oh my
hi-fi
goodness,
system.
I've lost all my money, you know? I mean, that's not about surveillance. That's just about additional risks of IoT devices.
Yeah, I have a similar hi-fi system in my home, way back from my youth, and it still sounds good. And it's totally not connected. We're at the end of our webinar. It was interesting, it was enlightening, it was disturbing. It was many things at the same time. Would you have one final comment to our viewers, to our participants, Phil, before we close this webinar?
Yeah, I guess it sounds like, you know, it's all gloom and doom. So yeah, I guess it's kind of, yeah. So other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you enjoy the play? Yeah, I think that in Europe, there's more opportunities to do something in the regulatory realm that you cannot do in the US. And so we should try to take advantage of that. That means, but we need to have expert opinions involved in that. We need to have people that specialize in this area of technology, providing advice.
Let this be a clear sounding signal towards all the legislative people in this country and in this continent to work together towards this common and very positive and promising and necessary goal. I want to thank you, Ben van Lier and Phil Zimmermann, for this very interesting hour. Hope to see you soon again. all the participants, I thank you for joining. Thanks very much for now, and have a great day in safety. Goodbye.
All right.
Right.